A baby vanished during a family barbecue, but 15 years later, a neighbor makes a shocking confession. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Emily Foster pressed the light blue dress against her chest as she stood in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom. 15 years had passed, but the room remained exactly as it had been on that summer day, a shrine to a life interrupted. Lily's crib still occupied the center of the room, surrounded by stuffed animals frozen in an eternal vigil. The mobile of dancing stars hung motionless above, its lullaby long silenced. The morning sunlight filtered through yellow curtains, casting the room in a warm glow that belied the coldness Emily felt inside. She traced her fingers over the tiny flowers embroidered on the dress collar, remembering how she had sewn it herself during her pregnancy. It was the last thing Lily had worn before she vanished. The shrill ring of the telephone shattered the sepulchral silence of the house. Emily startled, clutching the dress tighter as if someone might snatch it away. The ringing persisted, echoing through the empty hallway. With trembling hands, she carefully folded the dress and placed it on the rocking chair before hurrying downstairs. "Hello?" Her voice cracked from disuse. She rarely received calls anymore. Most friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with her refusal to move on. "Mrs. Foster, this is Detective Ramirez." Emily's knees weakened at the sound of the detective's voice. For years after Lily's disappearance, she had jumped at every phone call, hoping for news. But as time passed, those calls had stopped coming. "We need to talk," Ramirez continued. "Walter Thompson has asked to see you. He claims to have information about your daughter." Emily gripped the counter to steady herself. Walter Thompson, their elderly neighbor from when Lily disappeared, the man who had helped organize search parties, who had brought casseroles when neighbors stopped coming by. "Is this another false lead?" Emily whispered, fear and hope battling within her chest. "I don't know," Ramirez replied honestly. "But he's at Serene Pines Rest Home, and he's been insistent, says it's urgent. I can pick you up in 20 minutes. 30 minutes later, Emily sat rigid in Detective Ramirez's sedan as they drove toward the outskirts of town. The detective had aged in the 15 years since Lily's disappearance, his black hair now streaked with silver, lines etched deeper around his eyes. But his determination had never wavered. Even when the department had officially classified the case as cold, Ramirez had continued investigating in his spare time. "Don't get your hopes up," he warned, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "These late testimonies often lead nowhere." Emily barely heard him. Her thoughts raced ahead to Walter Thompson, to what he might know, to why he would wait 15 years to speak up. The rest home loomed before them, a 3-story brick building surrounded by immaculately maintained gardens that failed to soften its institutional appearance. The antiseptic smell hit Emily as soon as they entered, mingling with the underlying sense of cafeteria food and industrial cleaning products. A nurse led them down a corridor where elderly residents shuffled past or sat in wheelchairs, staring vacantly at nothing. Emily felt a surge of claustrophobia. This place smelled of endings, not beginnings, not the answers she'd spent 15 years seeking. At the end of the hallway, in a small solarium with potted ferns and oversized windows, they found Walter Thompson. Emily barely recognized him. The strong, broad-shouldered neighbor who had lifted her daughter onto his shoulders at neighborhood picnics was now a withered husk. His skin hung loose on his frame, lost in an oversized dark green cardigan despite the warmth of the room. A gray knit cap covered his once thick hair. But his eyes, those were the same. Clear blue eyes that now shone with the weight of something long carried. "Emily," he whispered, his voice like crumpling paper. "You came." Emily sank into a chair beside him while Ramirez remained standing, watchful and professional. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. You said you had information about Lily? Walter's gnarled hands clutched the armrests of his wheelchair. I should have told you years ago, he said, voice trembling. I've been a coward. Emily leaned forward, gripping her purse strap so tightly her knuckles whitened. Told me what, Walter? The old man drew a shaky breath, tears welling in his eyes. I saw who took your daughter, Emily, he said. It was my sister, Margaret. The world tilted beneath Emily. She clutched the arms of her chair to keep from falling, her vision narrowing to Walter's weathered face. His sister, Margaret, the quiet woman who had lived with him for a few years, who had attended the same barbecue where Lily disappeared. What did you say? Emily whispered, though she had heard perfectly. Ramirez stepped closer, his posture tense. Mr. Thompson, are you saying your sister abducted Lily Foster 15 years ago? Walter nodded, a tear tracking down his wrinkled cheek. Margaret lost a baby 6 months before, he explained, stillborn at 7 months. It broke her. She was never right after that. Emily felt bile rising in her throat. All these years, and the kidnapper had lived just houses away. At the barbecue, Walter continued, his voice growing fainter, when you went inside to get a towel for Lily, Margaret just took her from the stroller. I didn't know then. I found out weeks later, but by then she'd moved away. Said she was starting fresh. And you said nothing? Ramirez's voice was dangerously quiet. Walter shook his head miserably. She was my sister. She'd had a psychotic break. I was afraid they'd put her away forever. And the baby, Lily, she seemed well cared for. Margaret loved her like her own. Emily lunged forward, grabbing Walter's cardigan. 15 years, she screamed, her composure shattering like glass. 15 years you let me believe my daughter was dead. Do you have any idea what you've done? Ramirez tried to pull her back, but Emily's grief and rage had hardened into something physical and immovable. Where is she? She demanded, shaking Walter's frail frame. Where is my daughter? Margaret died last week, Walter said, tears now streaming freely down his creased face. That's why I'm telling you now. Lily is alive. Margaret raised her as Jessica in a small town about 2 hours from here. Emily's hands fell away from Walter's sweater as she staggered back, the enormity of his revelation washing over her like a tidal wave. Her daughter was alive. After 15 years of nightmares imagining what terrible fate had befallen her baby, after 15 years of empty holidays and birthday cakes left uneaten, after 15 years of a marriage destroyed by grief and blame, Lily was alive. You let me suffer, Emily whispered, her voice hollow with shock. You watched me search for her. You brought food to my house while knowing all along. Walter's face contorted with shame and regret. I'm sorry, he gasped, clutching suddenly at his chest. I never meant... His words cut off as pain visibly rippled across his features. He's having a cardiac event, Ramirez said sharply, already reaching for his phone to call for medical help. Step back, Emily. Nurses rushed in, pushing Emily aside as they tended to Walter. His blue eyes had gone wide with panic, fixed on Emily as medical staff swarmed around him. In the chaos, his wheelchair was jostled, and the dark green cardigan slipped from his shoulders. As a nurse retrieved it, something fell from the pocket. A photograph and a piece of paper, with an address scrawled on it. Emily snatched them up before anyone noticed, backing away from the emergency, unfolding before her. In the hallway, leaning against the wall for support, Emily looked down at the photo in her trembling hands. It showed a teenage girl with chestnut waves and a familiar smile. Her smile, standing on what appeared to be a school stage. The girl wore a light blue dress, the exact same shade as the one Emily had clutched that morning. Not the same dress. That would be impossible, but the coincidence struck Emily like a physical blow. Through the window, she could see medical staff performing CPR on Walter, his fragile body jerking with each compression. Ramirez stood to the side, his dark eyes meeting Emily's through the glass. 15 years of uncertainty had crystallized into a single, terrible truth. Her daughter was alive, raised by her kidnapper, while Emily had preserved an empty room like a mausoleum. A stranger had watched Lily's first steps, heard her first words, celebrated her birthdays, milestones Emily had mourned instead of witnessed. She looked back at the photograph, at the girl with her eyes and chin, wearing a blue dress that seemed to connect them across time and trauma. The image blurred as tears filled Emily's eyes. While doctors declared Walter Thompson's death, Emily couldn't tear her eyes from the photograph. Definitive proof that her daughter was alive, wearing the blue dress that symbolized everything stolen from her 15 years ago. Walter Thompson's funeral service was brief, attended by barely a dozen people. Emily observed from a distance, hidden beneath dark sunglasses, as the simple casket was lowered into the ground. She felt no satisfaction in his passing, only a hollow emptiness, where her anger had burned so fiercely just days before. The old man had taken most of his secrets to the grave, leaving her with a photograph, an address, and 15 years of questions. Detective Ramirez stood at the periphery of the cemetery, coordinating with plainclothes officers. He had assembled a small team to locate Jessica, Lily, without alarming the girl. His expression was grim as Emily approached after the mourners dispersed. "We need to be methodical about this," he warned, removing his sunglasses to meet her gaze directly. "The department has assigned Dr. Klein, a child psychologist, to help with the transition." A slim woman with silver-streaked hair extended her hand to Emily. "Mrs. Foster, I understand your urgency, but we must proceed with extreme caution. Jessica has just lost the only mother she's ever known. Learning that her entire identity is based on a lie will be devastating." Emily nodded mechanically, though inside she bristled at the suggestion that she needed to be cautious about reclaiming her own daughter. While Ramirez and Dr. Klein discussed protocols and legal procedures, Emily's attention drifted to the photograph she'd taken from Walter's pocket, the girl in the blue dress, her daughter, so close now. "We'll make initial contact tomorrow," Ramirez was saying. "Just to establish the situation, you should prepare yourself for a lengthy process." But Emily had waited 15 years. She wouldn't wait another day. That afternoon, she rented a car under her maiden name and drove the 2 hours to Maplewood, the small town where, according to Walter, Margaret Thompson had raised Lily as Jessica. It was a postcard-perfect community with a tree-lined main street and red brick storefronts. Emily parked outside a cafe across from the local high school, her heart racing as the final bell rang and teenagers began streaming out the double doors. She scanned each face with desperate intensity until... there she was. The girl from the photograph, walking with 2 friends, her chestnut hair catching the sunlight. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The resemblance was unmistakable now. The girl had Emily's heart-shaped face and David's long, graceful stride. 15 years melted away in an instant. Despite the rational part of her brain warning against it, Emily started the car and followed at a discreet distance as Jessica and her friends walked through town. Eventually, the friends peeled off in different directions, leaving Jessica to continue alone down a quiet residential street lined with modest houses. She stopped at a small brick home with blue shutters and a well-tended garden. Emily parked across the street, her hands trembling on the steering wheel as she watched her daughter, her Lily, unlock the front door and disappear inside. For hours, Emily sat there, unable to move, watching the windows for glimpses of movement. Evening fell, lights came on, and still Emily remained, paralyzed by indecision. What would she say? How could she possibly explain? Every rehearsed speech seemed inadequate against the magnitude of their situation. A sharp rap on her window startled her out of her reverie. A middle-aged man with salt-and-pepper hair and suspicious eyes stood beside her car. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear that his interest was far from helpful. "You've been parked here for hours." Emily's mind raced. I'm considering buying property in the neighborhood, she improvised weakly, just getting a feel for the area. The man's expression hardened. At 8 o'clock at night, staring at a specific house? I should go, Emily said, fumbling for her keys. Wait. The man pulled out his phone and quickly snapped a photo of her license plate. Just in case my concerns about strangers watching teenage girls turn out to be justified. Emily drove away, her heart pounding. She found a dingy motel on the outskirts of town, checking in under her maiden name. The room was basic and impersonal. Faded floral bedspreads, a television at least a decade old, water stains on the bathroom ceiling. She paced the worn carpet, alternating between regret at her impulsiveness and renewed determination. Her phone rang at nearly midnight. Ramirez's name flashed on the screen. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded without preamble. You've compromised the entire operation. Frank Donovan, the social worker who's taken temporary custody of Jessica, has already alerted local authorities about a suspicious woman watching the house. Emily sank onto the bed. How did you find me? Credit card rental for the car, Ramirez replied tersely. Emily, this is exactly what we wanted to avoid. That girl has just lost her mother, and now she's being stalked by a stranger. How do you think that makes her feel? She's my daughter, Emily whispered. She doesn't know that, Ramirez countered, and finding out from a stranger in a rental car isn't the way she should learn the truth. After hanging up, Emily lay awake, staring at the stained ceiling. Ramirez's words stung because they contained an uncomfortable truth. In her mind, Jessica was still the baby who had been stolen from her. But the reality was a teenager who had grown up with another name, another life, another mother. Her phone rang again at dawn. There's something else you should know, Ramirez said, his voice oddly hesitant. I contacted David. Emily sat bolt upright. You did what? He's her father, Emily. He has a right to know. After he blamed me for losing her, after he walked out when I needed him most. The old bitterness rose like bile in her throat. That was 14 years ago, Ramirez said gently. People change, and regardless of your feelings about him, he's coming to Maplewood. Today. The thought of facing David after all these years was almost more than Emily could bear. The man who had once promised to love her through better or worse had abandoned her in the worst moment of her life, convinced that her negligence had led to Lily's disappearance. Their divorce had been quick but brutal, severing the last thread of her former life. And now he was coming here, to claim his share of the daughter they had lost and found. Desperation drove Emily back to the brick house with blue shutters. It was still early, just past 8 in the morning, but she couldn't risk waiting. If Ramirez and David arrived first, she might lose control of the situation entirely. She sat in her rental car for 20 minutes, gathering courage, before finally approaching the front door. Her finger hesitated over the doorbell for a long moment before pressing it. The door opened to reveal Jessica, dressed in jeans and a simple green sweater. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Her eyes were David's, but the small dimple in her left cheek was unmistakably Emily's. Can I help you? Jessica asked, her expression guarded. She kept one hand on the door, ready to close it. Emily's carefully prepared words evaporated. Her voice faltered. I'm a friend of your mother's. Jessica's grip on the door tightened, but after a moment's hesitation, she stepped back. Come in, I guess. But Frank will be back soon. The interior of the house was modestly furnished but comfortable. Photos lined the walls and mantelpiece. Jessica at various ages, always with Margaret. Halloween costumes, school portraits, beach vacations. A life fully lived while Emily marked each passing year with an empty cake and unlit candles. How did you know my mom? Jessica asked, sitting on the edge of an armchair, studying Emily with wary eyes. Emily struggled to maintain her composure. We went way back, she said lamely. I heard about her passing. I'm so sorry. Jessica nodded, her grief evident, but controlled. Thank you. Your mother kept something of mine, Emily improvised, desperate to extend the conversation. A light blue dress. Something shifted in Jessica's expression, confusion, then suspicion. How do you know about that? That dress was special to her. She kept it in her closet, wrapped in tissue paper. Emily's heart accelerated. She never mentioned me, she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. No, Jessica said slowly. Who did you say you were again? Before Emily could answer, the front door opened and the man from the previous night, Frank Donovan, walked in. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed dangerously. You, he said, pulling out his phone. Jessica, go to your room. Wait, Emily pleaded, rising from her seat. Please, I can explain. Recognition dawned suddenly in Jessica's eyes. It's you, isn't it? She exclaimed, backing away. The woman from the TV, the mother of that kidnapped baby. The confrontation exploded in a cacophony of accusations. Jessica screamed at Emily to leave, her face flushed with anger and confusion. Frank moved to physically block Emily from approaching the girl. She's my daughter, Emily cried out. Lily is my daughter. My name is Jessica, the girl shouted back, grabbing a framed photograph from a side table and hurling it toward Emily. The frame missed her by inches, shattering against the wall. Frank intervened physically, trying to restrain Emily as she attempted to move toward Jessica. In the struggle, Emily's foot caught on the edge of a rug. She fell backward, her head striking the corner of a coffee table with a sickening crack. Pain exploded behind her eyes, and the room tilted precariously. Through the haze, she was dimly aware of sirens approaching, of Frank's voice speaking urgently into a phone, of Jessica's terrified sobs from somewhere across the room. When the police arrived, they found Emily semi-conscious on the floor, blood matting her hair where she'd struck the table. Jessica huddled in a corner in shock, while Frank tried to explain the chaotic situation. Emergency medical technicians loaded Emily onto a stretcher, securing a cervical collar around her neck as a precaution. As they wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance, Emily's vision cleared enough to see through the window. Jessica, standing on the sidewalk, trembling visibly as a man placed a tentative hand on her shoulder. David. After 15 years, he looked both familiar and like a stranger. His once dark hair was threaded with silver, his face more lined, but his stance was the same. Steady, contained, certain. Through the rear window of the ambulance, Emily saw Bailey being consoled by a man, David, who had just arrived. The fluorescent lights of Maplewood Hospital buzzed overhead as Emily lay on the narrow examination bed, her head throbbing where it had struck the coffee table. A police officer stood just outside her door. Not quite a guard, but certainly not there for her protection. Through the thin curtain, she could hear the murmured conversations of hospital staff, the occasional mention of that woman, followed by hushed whispers. The local news played on a small television mounted in the corner of the room. Emily watched with growing horror as her story was transformed into sensationalist fodder. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Obsessed Mother Attacks Teen," the narrative skillfully edited to omit any mention of Margaret Thompson's crime. They showed footage of Jessica being escorted from the house, her face blurred, but her distress evident, while Emily was portrayed as a deranged stalker. "They've got it all wrong," she whispered to the empty room. Detective Ramirez had managed to prevent her immediate arrest, calling in favors with the local authorities and explaining the extraordinary circumstances, but the charges of stalking and trespassing remained very real possibilities. Worse still, a restraining order had been issued, legally prohibiting Emily from coming within 500 feet of Jessica. The door opened and Emily turned, expecting another disapproving nurse. Instead, David stood in the doorway. 15 years had changed him in ways both subtle and profound. The ambitious architect with perpetually tousled hair and a quick smile had been replaced by a more subdued version of himself. Silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples, and fine lines had formed around his eyes that still held the same intensity that had once made her heart race. "The doctor says you have a mild concussion," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "No fracture, though." Emily struggled to sit up. "How did you find me?" "Ramirez." David stepped further into the room, his hands thrust deep in his pockets, a gesture she recognized from their marriage, something he did when feeling uncertain. "He's been keeping me updated." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, 15 years of unspoken words forming an invisible barrier. "She has your eyes," David finally said, sinking into the visitor's chair with a heaviness that suggested more than physical exhaustion. "And your temper." Emily felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Did you speak with her?" David nodded. "Briefly, she's devastated. Not just because she lost her adoptive mother, but now she's discovered her entire life was built on a lie." "A crime," Emily corrected sharply. "Not a lie. A crime committed against her, against us." "I know." David ran a hand through his hair, another familiar gesture. "But to her, Margaret was just Mom, the woman who raised her, who loved her." Emily turned away. Though she hated to admit it, David was right. To Jessica, Margaret Thompson was a beloved mother whose death was still fresh, not the disturbed woman who had stolen another family's child. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Ramirez is working with the local authorities to drop the charges against you. The social worker, Frank, he's temporarily Jessica's legal guardian. He's protective." "I noticed," Emily said dryly, touching the bandage on her head. "He thinks you're unstable." "What do you think, David?" The question escaped before she could reconsider, laden with the weight of their shared past. David met her gaze directly. "I think you're the same determined woman who refused to believe our daughter was gone when everyone else had given up, including me." There was a note of regret in his voice that caught Emily by surprise. Against medical advice and Ramirez's explicit instructions, Emily signed herself out of the hospital the following morning. The local press had gotten wind of her release. A small cluster of reporters waited at the hospital entrance, hungry for the next chapter in the sensational story. Emily slipped out through a service entrance, where David waited in a rental car. "Take me to the cemetery," she said as she slid into the passenger seat. David frowned. "The cemetery? Emily, you should be resting." "I need to understand who this woman was," Emily insisted. "The woman who stole our daughter, who raised her, who—" Her voice broke. "Who got to witness everything we missed." After a moment's hesitation, David nodded and pulled away from the curb. The cemetery was on the outskirts of Maplewood, a peaceful expanse of rolling green dotted with gravestones of varying ages. Margaret Thompson's plot was in a newer section, the earth still bare of grass marked by a simple granite headstone. "Margaret Ann Thompson," it read, with her birth and death dates. Below was a single line, "Beloved Mother." Emily stared at those words, her hands clenched at her sides. Beloved Mother. A title earned through theft, through 15 years of lies. "She even denied us the right to grieve properly," Emily whispered. "All these years we didn't know if Lily was alive or dead, suffering or safe." David stood slightly apart from her, his own grief a private thing. They had never learned to mourn together. It was what had ultimately driven them apart. When Lily disappeared, Emily had channeled her pain into relentless searching, while David had retreated into work and eventually therapy. Their different approaches to grief had created a chasm that proved unbridgeable. "Did you ever imagine this?" David asked softly. "That we'd find her alive?" "Every day," Emily admitted. "And also never. It was like holding two opposite truths at once. They fell silent, both contemplating the fresh grave before them. The grave of a stranger who had known their daughter better than they did. "What are you doing here?" a voice demanded from behind them. Emily and David turned to find Jessica standing between two rows of headstones, her face flushed with anger, her hands trembling at her sides. "Did you come to celebrate?" she accused, tears welling in her eyes. "She was a good mother. She wasn't crazy like they're saying." Emily took a step toward her, but Jessica backed away. "We're not celebrating, Jessica," she said gently. "We're trying to understand." "Understand what? That you're going to ruin my life? That everything I thought I knew is a lie?" Jessica's voice rose with each question, attracting the attention of a groundskeeper who looked up from his work nearby. "No," David intervened, his tone calm. "We're trying to understand the woman who raised you, who, despite what she did to us, clearly loved you very much." Jessica seemed momentarily disarmed by David's words. She wiped angrily at her tears. "I found her diary," she said abruptly. "After she died, she kept it hidden in a box under her bed." Emily's heart began to race. "What did it say?" "Everything. About taking me from the stroller at the barbecue. About changing my name. About cutting my hair and moving 2 hours away so no one would recognize me." Jessica's voice was flat, as if reciting facts from a textbook rather than the details of her own abduction. "She kept newspaper clippings about my disappearance, too. And the blue dress." "The dress?" Emily echoed, her voice barely audible. Jessica nodded. "She kept it wrapped in tissue paper. Never let me touch it. Said it was too special." Her gaze hardened again. "Now I know why." The groundskeeper had set aside his tools and was speaking into a cell phone, casting suspicious glances in their direction. In the distance, a police siren wailed. "Someone called the police," David said urgently. "We should go." "No," Jessica said suddenly. She glanced toward the approaching sirens, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a small metal box. "She kept this for you," she said, thrusting it at Emily before turning and running between the gravestones. Emily clutched the box as David pulled her toward their car. They barely made it out of the cemetery before a police cruiser turned in, lights flashing. "Where can we go?" David asked, checking the rearview mirror anxiously. "There's a motel on the edge of town," Emily directed. "I stayed there last night." The motel room was as dingy as Emily remembered. Faded wallpaper, a sagging mattress, the persistent smell of old cigarettes despite the no smoking sign. But it offered temporary sanctuary as they examined the contents of Margaret Thompson's box. Inside were dozens of letters, never sent, that Margaret had written to Emily over the years. Each was dated, the handwriting varying from the shaky script of someone in emotional distress to the more controlled penmanship of later years. Emily read aloud from the first letter, dated just weeks after Lily's abduction. "I know what I did was unforgivable. But when I saw your baby, something broke inside me. All I could think was that God had taken my child and given me a chance to take yours instead." The letters continued chronologically, documenting Lily Jessica's growth and milestones, interspersed with Margaret's conflicted feelings, sometimes justifying her actions, other times expressing profound remorse. What kind of forgiveness did she expect? Emily wondered aloud, sifting through the disturbing cache of correspondence that revealed the fragmented mind of a woman who simultaneously loved the child and understood the monstrosity of her crime. The final letter, dated just 3 weeks before Margaret's death, contained a shocking revelation. "I've contacted an attorney to help me prepare for Jessica's return to you. I know now that I must face the consequences of what I've done, no matter how much it will hurt her to learn the truth. But the doctors have found cancer in my liver and lungs. They give me months, maybe weeks. I am a coward even at the end. I will die before I can make this right." Emily let the letter fall from her trembling fingers. "She was going to tell the truth," she whispered. "After all these years." David picked up the letter, reading it again with a furrowed brow, but she ran out of time. A heavy pounding on the door startled them both. "Police! Open up!" Emily scrambled to gather the letters, but it was too late. The door burst open and 2 uniformed officers entered, weapons drawn. "Emily Foster, you're under arrest for violation of a restraining order," one announced as the other holstered his weapon and produced handcuffs. "This is a mistake," David protested, stepping forward. "She hasn't violated anything." "Sir, please step back," the officer warned. "We have evidence she was at the cemetery, well within the prohibited 500-foot radius of Jessica Thompson." As they handcuffed Emily and recited her rights, she caught a glimpse through the open door of Jessica standing on the sidewalk, holding the blue dress against her chest, her expression torn between anger and curiosity about the woman who might have been her mother. The holding cell at the Maplewood police station smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. Emily sat on the hard bench, listening to the officers' hushed conversations floating from the bullpen. Their whispers carried fragments like, "That crazy woman" and "Poor Thompson girl," down the corridor to her cell. "You don't understand," she had repeated during processing, her voice growing hoarser with each iteration. "That's my daughter, my baby who was stolen from me." The officer taking her fingerprints had merely sighed. "Ma'am, everyone here has a story." To the people of Maplewood, the narrative was simple. Margaret Thompson, beloved single mother and active community member, had recently passed away. Now, some unhinged woman from out of town was harassing her grieving teenage daughter with wild claims. They didn't see a mother reuniting with her stolen child. They saw only a disturbed stalker. Emily curled her fingers around the cold metal bench. Sleep seemed impossible, yet exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. The past 48 hours had rewritten her reality so completely that she couldn't orient herself in this new world where Lily was alive but unreachable. Morning brought Detective Ramirez, his face a carefully composed mask of professional concern as he approached her cell. "I pulled some strings," he said, his voice low. "You're being released on bail, but the restraining order remains in effect." "Ramirez," Emily began. "Don't." He held up a hand. "You've made this infinitely more complicated. If you'd followed protocol, we could have arranged a supervised introduction. Instead, you've traumatized that girl all over again." Outside the police station, reporters clustered like vultures. Emily ducked her head as Ramirez guided her to a waiting car where David sat behind the wheel. "Where to?" David asked once they'd escaped the press. "The Pinewood Inn," Emily replied, naming a small hotel on the opposite side of town from Jessica's home. "I need to stay within the legal distance, but I can't leave Maplewood. Not now." At the hotel, Emily stood at the window, watching local news crews interview Margaret's neighbors. An elderly woman tearfully described how Margaret had always helped with her groceries. A middle-aged man praised her volunteer work at the library. The narrative being constructed bore no resemblance to the disturbed woman who had stolen another's child. David knocked softly before entering her room, carrying coffee from the lobby. His presence still felt surreal. This man who had once been the center of her world, now a virtual stranger connected only by their shared loss and newfound hope. "We need to talk about next steps," he said, setting the cup before her. "Legally, medically, emotionally, for all of us." "There's nothing to discuss," Emily replied. "She's our daughter. We should be bringing her home." David sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "It's not that simple, and you know it. To her, we're strangers making impossible claims. Claims supported by DNA, by witness testimony, by Margaret's own confession." Emily's voice rose sharply. "Why should we proceed carefully when that woman took 15 years from us without a second thought?" Because rushing in has already backfired spectacularly, David countered. Because Jessica, Lily, is 15, not a baby anymore. She has agency, emotions, and a lifetime of memories that don't include us. The truth in his words stung. Emily turned back to the window, unable to meet his gaze. When did you become so reasonable? You were the one who couldn't even look at me after she disappeared. A heavy silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of unspoken recriminations. Therapy, David finally answered. Lots of it. And time. He moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could smell the familiar scent of his aftershave. I blamed you because I couldn't bear to blame myself. It was easier than admitting I was inside watching the game when our daughter vanished. Before Emily could respond, her phone rang. Dr. Klein's name flashed on the screen. Mrs. Foster, I've arranged a supervised meeting, the psychologist explained. Tomorrow at the Family Services office. Just you, David, and Jessica with myself and Mr. Donovan present. Emily's heart leapt. She agreed to this? Yes, though reluctantly. This is a significant step, so please, follow my guidance precisely. The Family Services office occupied the third floor of a bland government building in downtown Maplewood. The meeting room was deliberately neutral. Beige walls, fake plants in corners, a round table meant to eliminate power dynamics. Emily arrived early, her hands sweating as she arranged and rearranged her purse on her lap. Dr. Klein reviewed the ground rules. No pressure, no expectations, and above all, no emotional ambushes. Let Jessica set the pace, she emphasized. She's processing a profound trauma while still grieving Margaret. When Jessica entered, flanked by Frank Donovan, Emily had to grip the edge of the table to stop herself from rushing forward. The girl looked exhausted, dark circles beneath eyes that darted nervously around the room before settling anywhere but on Emily's face. For several excruciating minutes, no one spoke. The silence grew so thick, Emily could hear the wall clock ticking, counting away seconds that felt like hours. Then, without warning, Jessica placed the folded blue dress on the table. You made this, she said, her first words directed at Emily. Not a question, but a statement. Emily nodded, her throat suddenly dry. During my pregnancy, I sewed it myself. Jessica ran her fingers over the fabric, her expression unreadable. She kept it in a cedar box, never let me touch it. It was the last thing you wore before, Emily's voice caught. Before you disappeared, I was wearing a dress the same color that day. Jessica's gaze finally met hers. I have memories, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not of you specifically, but sensations. A perfume, a lullaby. She glanced at David. Sometimes I'd hear a certain type of laugh and feel something. I thought they were dreams. Emily felt tears welling but fought to contain them. Your favorite toy was a stuffed rabbit. You'd cry if we tried to wash it. A ghost of a smile flickered across Jessica's face. I still have a thing about rabbits. My room is full of them. The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Was full of them. I don't know what's going to happen to all my things now. Frank shifted uncomfortably. We can arrange to have your belongings moved wherever you'll be staying, Jessica. Where will that be? She asked, her vulnerability suddenly apparent. I can't go back to that house alone. Dr. Klein leaned forward. That's something we need to discuss together. There are several options, including temporary placement while you get to know Emily and David better. Jessica nodded, then abruptly stood. I need a minute, she said, heading for the door. Frank made to follow, but she waved him off. Just to the bathroom. I'm not running away. When the door closed behind her, Frank turned to Emily. I need to speak with you privately, he said, his tone considerably less hostile than at their previous encounters. In the hallway, Frank pulled a folder from his briefcase. I found these when clearing out Margaret's medical records, he said, handing Emily several documents. She was under psychiatric care after losing her baby. severe postpartum psychosis with delusional features. She stopped treatment abruptly 3 weeks before your daughter disappeared." Emily scanned the papers, her hands trembling. "You believe me now?" "The evidence is compelling," Frank admitted. "I've submitted these to the district attorney. Given the circumstances, they've agreed to withdraw the charges against you." When they returned to the meeting room, Jessica was already seated, her composure restored. She'd taken a photograph from her pocket, one of herself as a toddler with Margaret, at what appeared to be a birthday party. "I want to see," she said suddenly, looking at Emily. "Photos of me as a baby. Before." Emily reached for her purse, removing a small album she'd carried for 15 years. "I made copies," she explained. "The originals are in your room at home. I never changed anything." Jessica accepted the album hesitantly. With David looking over her shoulder, she turned pages slowly, examining photos of her infant self in Emily's arms at the hospital, balanced on David's shoulders at the park, sleeping in the crib that still waited in her preserved bedroom. "My hair was lighter," she observed. "It darkened as you grew," David explained, "just like mine did." The session ended after an hour. As they prepared to leave, Jessica hesitated, then asked, "Could I see the house? Where I lived before?" Emily's heart soared. "Of course," she said, careful to moderate her enthusiasm. "Whenever you're ready." "Tomorrow," Jessica decided, "but I want Frank to come with me." That night, Emily threw herself into frantic cleaning, reorganizing Lily's preserved room, trying to make it less a shrine and more a space that could welcome a teenager. She dusted shelves, replaced the crib linens with fresh sheets on the twin bed that had waited untouched, and carefully arranged the photos she'd shown Jessica on the dresser. David watched from the doorway. "You should rest," he advised. "Tomorrow's going to be emotionally draining for everyone." Emily paused, a stuffed rabbit in her hands. "I keep thinking this might be a dream," she confessed. "That I'll wake up and she'll still be gone." Later, as they sat in the kitchen drinking tea, Ramirez called with unexpected news. "The charges have been officially dropped," he reported. "Frank Donovan presented Margaret's psychiatric records to the DA. Your story checks out. Completely." Emily should have felt relieved, but found herself wondering what new challenges tomorrow would bring. Reclaiming legal parenthood was one thing. Rebuilding a relationship with a daughter who'd grown up calling another woman Mom was something else entirely. As she prepared for bed, Emily found, forgotten in the back of a drawer, the tiny crocheted bootie that matched the blue dress. The second item of the set that had never been worn, waiting 15 years for the return of a foot that had long outgrown it. Frank's sedan pulled up in front of Emily's house just after 10 in the morning. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, her face partially obscured behind a curtain of chestnut hair as she stared through the window at the 2-story colonial where she had spent the first 6 months of her life. In her hands, she clutched the small crocheted bootie Emily had sent her, a tangible connection to a past she couldn't remember. "You okay?" Frank asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Jessica nodded without speaking, her throat too tight for words. She'd barely slept the night before, her mind racing between memories of Margaret and questions about the life she might have lived in this house with these strangers, who were, biologically at least, her parents. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing Emily, visibly nervous, dressed in a simple blue blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She'd spent hours deliberating over her appearance, wanting to look approachable rather than formal, familiar rather than strange. "Hi," Emily said, stepping back to allow them entry. "Please, come in." Jessica crossed the threshold hesitantly, as if expecting the floor to shift beneath her feet. The foyer opened into a living room that felt simultaneously alien and vaguely familiar, like a place visited in a half-forgotten dream. Her eyes immediately found the photographs arranged on the mantelpiece and side tables. Images of herself as an infant held in loving arms that belonged to people she didn't know. "Would you like a tour?" David asked, maintaining a respectful distance. He'd arrived early to help Emily prepare, both emotionally and practically, for this momentous visit. Jessica nodded, grateful for his calm demeanor. Unlike Emily, whose barely contained emotions seemed to fill any room she occupied, David's presence was steadier, less overwhelming. "This is where you took your first steps," David said as they moved through the living room. "Right between the coffee table and the sofa. You were 10 months old and so proud of yourself." Jessica touched a photograph frame lightly, studying the image of herself balanced on chubby legs, arms outstretched toward the camera. "Did I cry a lot? As a baby?" "Not really," Emily replied, keeping her distance as Dr. Klein had advised. "You were generally happy, except when we tried to wash your rabbit." A small, involuntary smile touched Jessica's lips. Her fingers absently traced the outline of the booty in her pocket. The kitchen held the strongest sensation of déjà vu. Jessica paused by the sunny yellow wallpaper with its pattern of small daisies, reaching out to touch it as if drawn by an invisible force. "We haven't changed it," Emily explained, noticing her reaction. "I couldn't bring myself to redecorate anything. It feels..." Jessica struggled to articulate the strange sensation. "I know this sounds crazy, but it feels like I've been here before." Frank, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "Early childhood memories can be stored differently than later ones. Sometimes they're more sensory than visual. A color, a pattern, a feeling." Emily led them through the back door into the yard, her voice faltering slightly as she pointed to a spot near the maple tree. "The barbecue was here. Your stroller was over there in the shade." She swallowed hard. "I went inside to get a towel because you'd spilled juice on your dress. When I came back..." The unfinished sentence hung in the air, 15 years of grief suspended in the space between them. Jessica studied the yard, trying to imagine the scene. The gathered neighbors, the music, the smell of grilling food, and Margaret Thompson, slipping away with a baby while no one noticed. It seemed impossible, yet it had happened. Her entire life had pivoted on that moment. Back inside, tension mounted as they approached the stairs leading to the second floor. Jessica hesitated at the bottom step, suddenly aware that they were heading toward the room where Emily had preserved her infancy, like a museum exhibit. "You don't have to do this today," Frank reassured her, sensing her discomfort. "No, I want to," Jessica insisted, though her knuckles whitened around the banister as they ascended. The upstairs hallway was lined with more photographs. Jessica as a newborn in the hospital, sleeping in someone's arms, reaching toward the camera with a toothless grin. A visual timeline of a life interrupted at 6 months. Emily paused outside a door painted soft white, her hand resting on the knob. "This is your room," she said, pushing it open slowly. Jessica stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sight before her. The room had clearly been a nursery, with walls painted the palest blue and decorated with fluffy white clouds. But Emily had made changes. The crib was gone, replaced by a twin bed with a simple blue comforter. The changing table had given way to a desk. It was an awkward hybrid, a space caught between preserving the past and acknowledging the present. "May I?" Jessica's voice was barely audible. "Could I have a few minutes alone in here?" Emily nodded, though the request visibly pained her. "Of course, we'll be downstairs." Frank hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'll be fine," Jessica assured him. "I just need some space to process this." As the adults retreated downstairs, Emily's phone rang. It was Ramirez with welcome news. All charges had been officially dropped, thanks to the medical evidence Frank had submitted proving Margaret's mental state at the time of the abduction. "That's one hurdle cleared," David said when Emily relayed the news. "But we've got a long road ahead with Lily. With Jessica," he corrected himself, still struggling with which name to use. Frank nodded. She's in a uniquely difficult position. Not only is she grieving Margaret, but she's having to reconcile her entire identity. Everything she thought she knew about herself has been called into question. Their conversation halted abruptly at the sound of the back door slamming. David rushed to the window in time to see Jessica running across the yard, disappearing around the side of the house. "She's gone!" he exclaimed, already moving toward the door. Emily and David split up to search the neighborhood, panic rising with each empty street they encountered. Frank contacted the local police. Though he emphasized it wasn't an emergency, Jessica wasn't in danger, just overwhelmed. After 20 frantic minutes, Emily found herself at the small neighborhood park 3 blocks from their home. There, on a swing set partially hidden by a stand of oak trees, sat Jessica, gently rocking back and forth, her feet dragging in the wood chips beneath. Emily approached slowly, giving Jessica plenty of time to notice her presence. Without asking permission, she took the adjacent swing, gripping the chains as she lowered herself onto the plastic seat. "We used to bring you here on Sunday afternoons," Emily said softly. "You were too small for the swings, but you loved watching the older children. You'd laugh every time a dog ran past." Jessica continued swinging gently, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "I shouldn't have run," she said finally. "I just couldn't breathe in there. It was too much. All those pictures of me, that room, everything you kept waiting for me." "I understand," Emily replied, fighting the urge to reach for her daughter's hand. "This is overwhelming for all of us." They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the creaking of the swing chains and distant traffic. "Did you sing to me?" Jessica asked suddenly, her voice small. "When I was little?" The question caught Emily off guard. "Yes, every night before bed." "What did you sing?" Emily's throat tightened. After a moment's hesitation, she began to sing softly, her voice tender with memory. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. If that mockingbird won't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring." As the simple lullaby filled the space between them, Jessica closed her eyes, her swing slowing to a stop. When Emily finished, Jessica remained silent, her expression unreadable. Just as Emily feared she'd overstepped, Jessica spoke, her voice barely audible over the squeaking of the swing chains. "I remember that song." Emily's heart stuttered. "You do?" "Not the words or the tune exactly," Jessica clarified, "but the feeling of it, like my body remembers something my mind completely forgot." Emily and Jessica remained on the swings as twilight painted the sky in deepening shades of purple and blue. The lullaby had opened something between them. Not quite a bond, but a delicate bridge spanning 15 years of separation. "Tell me more," Jessica said, her voice steadier now. "About when I was a baby." Emily's face softened in the fading light. "You had the most infectious laugh. You'd giggle at the silliest things. When David made funny faces or when I played peekaboo with your rabbit." She paused, carefully navigating the minefield of memories. "Your first tooth came in at 4 months. You were fussy for days before it appeared." "What were my favorite words?" Jessica asked. "When I started talking?" "You could say Mama and Dada before you disappeared," Emily replied, her voice catching slightly. "And Bun Bun for your rabbit. You were starting to say up when you wanted to be picked up." Jessica absorbed this information silently, trying to reconcile these details with the person she had become. Eventually, David found them there, relief washing over his face as he approached. He kept his distance, sitting on a nearby bench rather than crowding Jessica. "So my name was Lily," Jessica said after a while, testing the syllables. "Lily Foster." "Lily Rose Foster," Emily confirmed, "after my grandmother and David's mother." Jessica repeated it quietly. Lily Rose Foster, as if trying to determine whether the name fit her. The sound was foreign on her tongue, yet something about it resonated in a way she couldn't explain. The next day, Jessica met with Dr. Klein for an extended session. The psychologist's office was a calm space with soft lighting and comfortable furniture, a stark contrast to the clinical setting of their previous meeting at Family Services. "How does it feel," Dr. Klein asked, "to have memories of people you don't remember knowing?" Jessica twisted a tissue between her fingers. "Confusing. Like there's this gap inside me. I keep thinking about all these birthdays and Christmases and first days of school that I had with Margaret, but now I wonder what they would have been like with—" She hesitated. "With my real parents." "Emily and David are your biological parents," Dr. Klein acknowledged, "but Margaret was real too. Your feelings for her, your memories, your love, those are all valid." "Then why do I feel guilty when I miss her?" Jessica's voice cracked. "Knowing what she did?" Dr. Klein leaned forward. "Because human emotions are complex. We can love people who have hurt others. We can miss people who have done terrible things. Your relationship with Margaret existed independently of her crime against your biological parents." Later that afternoon, David invited Jessica to his temporary apartment. Unlike Emily's approach of preserved memories and emotional intensity, David offered something different. A calm space where Jessica could explore another facet of her identity. "I don't know if Emily told you," he said, retrieving an old guitar from its case, "but I used to play this for you when you were a baby. You'd be fussy and nothing else would work. But as soon as I'd start playing, you'd calm down." Jessica eyed the instrument with curious recognition. "I always wanted to learn guitar. Margaret got me lessons for my 13th birthday, but I quit after a few months." "Maybe you just had the wrong teacher," David suggested with a small smile. He positioned the guitar in his lap and began playing a gentle melody. Jessica watched his fingers move across the strings, mesmerized by the familiar way his right hand kept rhythm. When she tapped her own finger against her knee in the exact same pattern, David noticed and paused. "Would you like to try?" he offered, extending the guitar. Jessica hesitantly took it, positioning it awkwardly in her lap. David showed her how to hold it properly, then guided her fingers to form a simple chord. "Like this," he demonstrated, and then moved to here. Jessica's first attempts produced awkward, discordant sounds, but David's patient instruction helped her find the right pressure and positioning. When she finally produced a clean chord progression, the surprise and delight on her face reminded David so forcefully of the baby he had lost that he had to turn away briefly to compose himself. "That genetic, huh?" Jessica asked, noticing his reaction. David nodded, clearing his throat. "You have my hands and apparently my ear for music." The following morning, Frank invited Emily and David to his office to discuss the legal processes ahead. Seated across from his desk, they faced the daunting array of paperwork required to officially reclaim their daughter. "We need to address several issues," Frank explained, spreading documents before them. "Birth certificates, identity documents, school records. Jessica legally doesn't exist in your world, and Lily legally doesn't exist in hers." Emily examined the papers with growing frustration. "So much bureaucracy to prove what we already know is true." "The system isn't built for situations like this," Frank acknowledged. "We're essentially merging two separate identities into one." "What about her name?" David asked. "Legally, I mean." Frank shuffled through more papers. "She'll need to decide whether to legally reclaim Lily Foster or maintain some version of her current identity. That's her choice." Later that afternoon, Jessica sat alone in Frank's office, examining the documents laid before her. In one hand, she held her original birth certificate. Lily Rose Foster, born to Emily and David Foster at Memorial Hospital. In her other hand, she clutched the counterfeit document Margaret had created, Jessica Ann Thompson, with falsified birth date, birthplace, and parents. "They look so real," she murmured, comparing the papers side by side. "How did she do this?" Frank sighed. Margaret was meticulous. She built your new identity carefully. Fake birth certificate, forged social security card, even a manufactured vaccination record. She used her connections as a former nurse to create a paper trail that would withstand casual scrutiny. Jessica traced her finger over the embossed seal on her true birth certificate. So which one am I? Frank looked at her with compassion. Legally, you're Lily Foster, but identity isn't just about legal documents. It's about who you feel yourself to be. The question of identity weighed heavily on Jessica as she agreed to visit the apartment she had shared with Margaret. This time, Emily drove her, maintaining a respectful silence during the journey. Upon arriving at the modest two-bedroom unit, Jessica hesitated before using her key. "You don't have to go in if it's too difficult," Emily offered. Jessica shook her head. "No, I need to do this, and I want you to see it, to understand what my life was like." Inside, the apartment felt both achingly familiar and strangely distant, as if Jessica were visiting a childhood home she had long since outgrown. Emily remained near the door, giving her daughter space to navigate this emotional landscape. "This was our living room," Jessica explained, gesturing to the cozy space with its worn sofa and bookshelves. "We'd watch movies here on Friday nights. Margaret always made popcorn with extra butter." She led Emily through the small dining area into her bedroom. The walls were painted a soft green, decorated with swimming medals and school pennants. Photos of Jessica throughout her childhood lined the dresser. School pictures, sports team photos, candid shots at the beach or park. "I was on the swim team," Jessica said, pointing to a trophy, "and I got straight A's in science." Emily absorbed each detail hungrily, cataloging the milestones and memories she had missed. "You look happy," she said softly, studying a photo of Jessica at what appeared to be a birthday party, surrounded by friends. "I was," Jessica admitted. "I didn't know anything was wrong." She moved to her closet, pulling out yearbooks and photo albums. "These are from elementary school, and these are from my first swimming competitions." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, paging through the albums as Jessica narrated each photo. It was like watching an alternate version of her daughter's life unfold, one where she was Jessica Thompson, beloved daughter of Margaret, with no knowledge of Emily Foster or the blue dress or the family that had searched for her for 15 years. As Jessica rummaged through her desk drawers, gathering small keepsakes she wanted to take, she paused suddenly. "I need to show you something." She led Emily to Margaret's bedroom, a space that still held the faint scent of the lavender lotion she had used. Jessica approached the wall beside the closet and pressed against a section of the wainscoting that appeared slightly different from the rest. A small panel popped open, revealing a hidden storage space. "I found this after she died," Jessica explained, reaching into the cavity. "I was looking for her jewelry box and found this instead." She withdrew a file folder stuffed with newspaper clippings about Lily Foster's disappearance. Each article was dated and organized chronologically, from the frantic initial reports to the gradually diminishing follow-ups as years passed. "She kept track of the investigation," Emily whispered, stunned by the meticulousness of Margaret's collection. "All these years." Jessica nodded, pulling out more items: a small velvet pouch containing a lock of baby-fine hair, a hospital bracelet with "Baby Girl Foster" printed on it, and finally, the first booty that matched the one Emily had sent her, the complete pair, now reunited after 15 years. "She kept these too," Jessica said quietly. "Part of me was angry when I found them, but part of me thinks she must have felt something. Regret, maybe. Why else keep reminders of what she'd done?" Emily noticed a leather-bound journal at the bottom of the cache. "Is that—" "Her diary," Jessica confirmed. "It goes back to before the kidnapping." Emily hesitated, unwilling to invade this intimate record without permission. "Have you read it?" "Some parts," Jessica admitted. It's difficult. She writes about her baby dying, about seeing me at the barbecue, about planning to take me. Her voice faltered. But she also writes about how much she loved me, how guilty she felt sometimes, especially when she saw missing child posters or news reports. Jessica carefully removed the diary, opening it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. This is from just a month before she died. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Jessica turns 15 next week. She looks more like her real mother every day. Sometimes I catch myself staring at her, seeing Emily Foster's features emerging as the baby fat fades from her cheeks. I wonder if anyone else notices the resemblance. I need to tell her the truth before someone else does. I've made an appointment with Mr. Breslin, the attorney. It's time to face what I've done, no matter what it costs me. Jessica deserves to know her real family before it's too late. As Jessica closed the diary, she looked at Emily with a mixture of sadness and determination. The only thing I don't understand is why, after 15 years of lies, Margaret decided it was finally time for the truth. Margaret's diary entry haunted Emily long after they left the apartment. The idea that the woman who had stolen her child had considered returning her, had actually taken steps toward confession and restitution, created a complicated tangle of emotions. Relief that the truth might have emerged sooner mingled with bitter anger that Margaret had waited 15 years, only to be stopped by illness rather than conscience. We need to understand exactly what happened in those final months, Emily said to David the next morning as they sat at her kitchen table, mugs of coffee growing cold between them. If Margaret was planning to reveal the truth, there might be more evidence, people she spoke to, arrangements she was making. David nodded thoughtfully. The diary mentioned an attorney named Breslin. We should start there. Jessica arrived later that afternoon, accompanied by Frank. She carried a weathered cardboard box containing items from Margaret's apartment, medical records, appointment books, and a stack of sympathy cards from the funeral. I found these last night, she explained, spreading a series of medical documents across the table. The papers told the stark progression of Margaret's illness, initial tests, the devastating diagnosis of stage IV liver cancer, with metastasis to the lungs, treatment options deemed largely palliative rather than curative. According to these dates, she was diagnosed about 4 months before she died, David observed, organizing the papers chronologically. And the first diary entry mentioning telling the truth comes just a few weeks after this initial diagnosis. Emily studied the papers, a pattern emerging. The terminal diagnosis was the catalyst. She finally decided to tell the truth when she realized she was dying. Jessica's expression remained carefully neutral, but Emily noticed her hands trembling slightly as she sorted through more papers. There's something else, she said, pulling out a business card paperclipped to an appointment reminder. Attorney James Breslin. She had 3 meetings with him in her final months. David took the card, already reaching for his phone. I'll see what I can find out. While David made calls in the next room, Emily helped Jessica continue sorting through Margaret's papers. They worked mostly in silence, the weight of what they were discovering creating a strange intimacy between them. Look at this, Jessica said suddenly, holding up a bank statement. She made a series of withdrawals, $5,000 total, in the weeks before she died. Emily frowned. What would she need that money for? Maybe legal fees or... Jessica hesitated. Maybe she was saving it for me, knowing what would happen after she was gone. The possibility that Margaret had been preparing not only to confess, but to provide for Jessica's future, added another layer to the already complex portrait of the woman who had both committed a terrible crime and raised a child with evident love and care. David returned, his expression animated. Breslin agreed to meet with us tomorrow. He can't share specifics without a court order, but he confirmed that Margaret consulted him about a family matter with legal implications. That has to be about me, Jessica said quietly. Later that afternoon, Emily drove Jessica to the oncology center where Margaret had received treatment. The sterile corridors and antiseptic smell brought back Jessica's recent memories of sitting beside Margaret during chemotherapy sessions, holding her hand as the toxic medications dripped into her veins. Dr. Patel, Margaret's oncologist, greeted them in his office, his expression compassionate but professionally reserved. Jessica had called ahead, explaining the unusual circumstances and requesting the meeting. "Ms. Thompson, or Ms. Foster, I'm not sure how to address you," Dr. Patel began awkwardly. "Jessica is fine," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the situation. "Jessica," he acknowledged with a nod. "As I explained on the phone, I can share information about your mother's medical condition since you were listed as her next of kin. But I'm not comfortable discussing personal conversations without proper legal clearance." "We understand," Emily interjected. "But anything you can tell us about her state of, mind in those final weeks would be helpful. Did she mention making any important decisions or needing to resolve something before she died?" Dr. Patel hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I can say this much. Margaret spoke often about needing to fix a terrible mistake before she died. In my experience, patients facing terminal diagnoses often feel a need to resolve unfinished business. Margaret was particularly fixated on this idea." "Did she mention what the mistake was?" Jessica asked. The doctor shook his head. "Not specifically, but in her final days, when the medications were making her less coherent, she sometimes confused you with someone else. She would look at you and call you Lily." Jessica inhaled sharply, her composure cracking for the first time. Emily reached out instinctively, then pulled back, unsure if her touch would be welcome. To her surprise, Jessica grasped her hand tightly. The following day brought Jessica's first session with Dr. Klein since the discoveries about Margaret's planned confession. The psychologist's office provided a safe space for Jessica to process her increasingly complicated feelings about the woman who had raised her. "I don't know how to feel anymore," Jessica admitted, pacing the small office. "Part of me is angry, so angry that she took me from my real family. But another part remembers how she stayed up all night when I had the flu, how she came to every swim meet and school play." Dr. Klein nodded. "It's natural to have conflicting feelings. Margaret committed a terrible crime against Emily and David, but she also loved you genuinely. How can I love her knowing what she did?" Jessica's voice broke. "How can I hate her remembering how she loved me?" "You don't have to choose," Dr. Klein explained gently. "Human relationships, especially parent-child bonds, are complex. Margaret's actions were inexcusable, but that doesn't invalidate the real love and care she provided." Jessica wiped away tears. "When I found out the truth, I felt like my whole life had been a lie. But it wasn't all a lie, was it? The love was real, even if the circumstances were based on something horrible." "Exactly," Dr. Klein affirmed, "and recognizing that complexity is an important step in integrating your two identities, the baby who was taken and the girl who was raised by Margaret." After the session, Emily helped Jessica pack some of her personal belongings from Margaret's apartment. The process was both practical and profoundly symbolic, selecting which pieces of her past would accompany her into this new chapter of her life. "Do you want to take these?" Emily asked, indicating a shelf of swimming trophies. Jessica nodded. "And my books and that quilt on the bed. Margaret made it for my 10th birthday." Emily carefully wrapped each trophy in newspaper, noting the dates and achievements. "You must have been dedicated to win all these." "Margaret drove me to practice every morning at 5 a.m., Jessica recalled, folding the handmade quilt. "Even in winter, even when she was tired from working late shifts." As they worked, Jessica shared more stories from her childhood with Margaret: birthday parties at the local roller rink, camping trips in the mountains, the Christmas she received her first camera. Emily absorbed each anecdote hungrily, filling in the blank spaces of the years she had missed. David, meanwhile, had spent the morning setting up shelves in what had once been Lily's preserved nursery. When Emily and Jessica arrived with boxes of belongings, he was putting the finishing touches on a space that now reflected Jessica's current age and interests: a desk for schoolwork, space for her books and music, walls ready for whatever posters or photographs she might want to display. "What do you think?" he asked uncertainly as Jessica surveyed the room. "It's nice," she said, setting down a box of books. "Different." That evening, David cooked dinner at Emily's house, a simple meal of pasta and salad. Nothing too formal or pressured. For the first time, Jessica sat at the dining table with both her biological parents, the silence initially awkward but gradually easing as David shared stories of his architectural work and Emily described the community garden project she'd helped establish. After dinner, Jessica found herself drawn to the photo albums in the living room. Old family photographs showed grandparents she had never met, cousins whose names she didn't know, holidays she hadn't been part of. "That's your grandmother Rose," Emily explained, sitting beside her on the sofa. "You were named partly after her, and there's your cousin Michael. He'd be about 20 now." "Do they know about me being found?" Jessica asked. Emily nodded. "They do, but I've asked them to give us time before reaching out. There's no rush to meet everyone at once." As Jessica turned pages, questions about her extended family prompted stories from both Emily and David, creating brief moments of connection through shared history. Later that week, Jessica expressed interest in returning to school, but worried about the reaction from classmates in Maplewood, who knew her only as Margaret's daughter. "Everyone's talking about it," she said during a family meeting with Frank. "Someone even posted about me on social media. I can't go back there and pretend nothing happened." "What about a different school?" David suggested. "You could make a fresh start." Jessica considered this. "Maybe, but I'd have to leave my friends, my swim team." Frank, who had been quietly observing, offered a proposal. "There's another option we should consider. Jessica could live temporarily with a neutral third party while she adjusts to her relationship with Emily and David." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, immediately wary. "A transitional living arrangement," Frank explained. "Jessica mentioned your sister David, Claire, right? If she's willing, Jessica could stay with her during the week, attend a new, school, and visit you on weekends. It would provide stability while allowing your relationship to develop without the pressure of immediate full-time cohabitation." Emily's immediate instinct was to protest. After 15 years apart, the thought of another separation, even a partial one, was painful. But looking at Jessica's expression, relieved, almost hopeful, she recognized that forcing an immediate full-time family situation might backfire. "What do you think, Jessica?" David asked, carefully using the name she was still most comfortable with. "I think," Jessica began hesitantly, "I think I need some space to figure out who I am now. Not just Jessica, not just Lily, but whoever I'm becoming." The next day, they visited Claire's home, a cheerful condo with a spare bedroom that could easily accommodate Jessica. Claire, a high school English teacher with no children of her own, had always been fond of Lily as a baby and embraced the opportunity to help her niece navigate this transition. "You'd have your own room," Claire explained, showing Jessica the bright space with a window overlooking a small garden. "And the high school where I teach is just a 10-minute walk." As they established the details of this arrangement, Jessica staying with Claire during the week, visiting Emily and David on weekends, with regular sessions with Dr. Klein, Emily felt a bittersweet mixture of hope and longing. Not the instant family reunion she had dreamed of for 15 years, but perhaps a more realistic path forward. That night, as Jessica packed her overnight bag for her first night at Claire's house, she hesitated before placing the blue dress among her clothes. She didn't know exactly why she felt the need to take it, only that this simple piece of fabric seemed to be the one thing that connected her two lives, her two identities, her two mothers. Claire's condo quickly became Jessica's refuge, a neutral territory where she wasn't defined solely as the kidnapped baby or the daughter of a kidnapper. The spare bedroom gradually transformed, reflecting Jessica's emerging sense of self. Swim team ribbons on one wall, photos of friends from Maplewood on the dresser, and a small stack of books beside the bed, novels Claire had recommended from her English teacher's repertoire. "Sleep well?" Claire asked, setting a bowl of cereal before Jessica on her first Monday morning. "Big day ahead." Jessica nodded, her stomach knotting with anxiety. Starting at Lincoln High meant facing a new environment without the emotional safety net of familiar faces. Claire had arranged everything: transfer paperwork, meeting with counselors, a modified schedule that accommodated Jessica's weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Klein. "Remember, you don't owe anyone your story," Claire reminded her as they walked to school together. "Mrs. Harmon in the guidance office knows the situation, but no one else needs details unless you choose to share them." The school hallways buzzed with typical Monday morning energy, students clustering around lockers, comparing weekend stories, navigating the social hierarchy that existed in every high school. Jessica kept her head down, clutching her new schedule, hyper-aware of curious glances from students who noticed an unfamiliar face. By lunchtime, the whispers had begun. A girl in her English class had recognized her name from news reports. The story of the kidnapped baby, reunited with her family after 15 years, had made national headlines, though most outlets had respected privacy enough to blur Jessica's face in photographs. She sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich, when a voice interrupted her isolation. "That seat taken?" A girl with purple-streaked hair and an armful of jangling bracelets stood across the table, lunch tray in hand. "No," Jessica replied cautiously. "I'm Zoe." The girl sat without waiting for further invitation. "You're in my bio class. Ms. Reeves paired us for the frog dissection next week, but you looked like you were on another planet when she announced it." Jessica managed a small smile. "Sorry. First day nerves." Zoe nodded knowingly. "New school mid-year? Brutal." Their conversation remained light. Classes, teachers, the mystery meat served in the cafeteria. Jessica felt herself relax fractionally, grateful for this uncomplicated human connection. The tentative peace shattered when three girls approached their table, expressions alight with morbid curiosity. "Are you that kidnapped girl?" the tallest asked without preamble. "The one who just found out her mom wasn't really her mom?" Jessica froze, her throat constricting. Before she could respond, Zoe intervened. "She's a new student, not a circus attraction," she said sharply. "Move along unless you want me explaining to Coach Willis why you're skipping basketball practice to harass people." The girls retreated, but the damage was done. Jessica spent the rest of the day acutely aware of stares and whispers following her through the corridors. "It'll die down," Claire assured her that evening. "Next week someone will dye their hair green or start a food fight, and you'll be old news." Jessica wasn't convinced, but she nodded anyway. That night she called Emily, their daily check-in, a new ritual establishing itself between them. "How was school?" Emily asked, her voice carefully neutral, though Jessica could hear the eagerness beneath. "Okay, some people recognized me." Jessica hesitated. "But I made one friend, I think." "That's wonderful," Emily replied, genuine warmth in her tone. "What's their name?" Their conversation flowed more easily now, less fraught with the intensity of their early interactions. Emily had been working with Dr. Klein on her own issues, learning to balance her natural desire to reclaim lost time with Jessica's need for space to process her dual identity. The weekend brought Jessica to Emily's house, now officially her house too, though it still didn't quite feel like home. David arrived on Saturday morning, bearing freshly baked croissants from the French bakery downtown and a small gift-wrapped package. "Guitar strings," he explained as Jessica unwrapped them. "I thought we might continue our lessons if you're interested." These weekend visits gradually developed their own rhythm. Saturday mornings often found David and Jessica on the back porch, guitars across their laps, David patiently guiding her through chord progressions and simple melodies. Emily would bring lemonade, sitting nearby but not too close, respecting the delicate bond forming between father and daughter. 3 weeks into this new arrangement, Jessica surprised them by inviting her new friend Zoe for Sunday lunch. The purple-haired girl arrived with a nervous smile and impeccable manners that belied her edgy appearance. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Foster," she said, handing Emily a small potted succulent. "My mom says plants make the best gifts because they grow with you." Emily beamed, recognizing the significance of Jessica bringing these two parts of her world together. "That's a lovely thought. And please, call me Emily." Zoe took the bizarre situation in stride, treating Jessica's complicated family history as simply another facet of her friend rather than her defining characteristic. When Jessica hesitantly showed her the preserved nursery-turned bedroom, complete with baby photos and the framed blue dress snippet, Zoe merely nodded. "Cool time capsule," she said. "My mom keeps my baby teeth in a jewelry box. Parents are weird about keeping pieces of us." Meanwhile, at Maplewood High, Jessica's former classmates processed her absence in various ways. A few loyal friends like Maya maintained contact, texting regularly and defending Jessica against gossip. Others, drawn to the sensational aspects of her story, spread increasingly exaggerated versions of events. "Maya invited me to her birthday party next weekend," Jessica told Emily during a Thursday evening phone call. "In Maplewood." "Do you want to go?" Emily asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. "I think so. She stuck by me when everyone was talking and—" Jessica hesitated. "I'd like to say goodbye to some people properly. I left so suddenly." The Maplewood visit proved both harder and more healing than Jessica had anticipated. Some former neighbors crossed the street to avoid her, while others embraced her with tears and apologies for not somehow recognizing the truth. Maya's party provided a buffer of normalcy, music, cake, teenage conversation that occasionally skirted around but never directly addressed the elephant in the room. As Jessica navigated these social complexities, the legal aspects of her situation progressed with bureaucratic slowness. Frank coordinated with attorneys to officially restore her legal identity, a process involving multiple court appearances and DNA tests, confirming what they already knew. "It's official," Frank announced one afternoon, arriving at Claire's with a manila envelope. "All the paperwork has been processed. Legally, you're Lily Foster again." Jessica accepted the documents with mixed emotions. Her birth certificate, the original, not Margaret's forgery, felt weighty in her hands. Her social security card now bore the name she'd been born with. "You don't have to use it socially yet," Frank assured her, noting her expression. "Legal names and what people call you are different things." At school, Jessica continued responding to the name she'd grown up with, but began signing Lily on legal documents and school papers. The first time she wrote Lily Foster on a biology quiz, her hand trembled so badly, the letters were barely legible. "It feels like I'm forging something," she confessed to Dr. Klein, "even though it's supposedly my real name." "Identity isn't just about names on paper," the psychologist replied. "It's about who you feel yourself to be, and right now, you're bridging two identities. That takes time." Significant breakthrough came unexpectedly when Jessica's music teacher mentioned the upcoming spring talent show. Despite her initial reluctance to draw attention, Jessica found herself intrigued by the possibility of performing. "I could play guitar," she mused during a weekend lesson with David. "You've taught me enough for a simple song." David's face lit up. "That would be wonderful. We could practice extra during your visits." The talent show became a goal. something future-oriented rather than past-focused. Jessica spent hours practicing, the guitar becoming a bridge not just to David but to a version of herself that wasn't defined by her complicated history. When the time came to register for the show, she hesitated over the name field on the form. "Problem?" asked Zoe, who had signed up to perform a spoken word piece. "Just deciding which name to use," Jessica replied. "Which feels right for the stage?" Zoe asked pragmatically. After a moment's consideration, Jessica wrote, "Lily Jessica Foster," on the line, acknowledging both her past and present, a signal of her evolving identity. News of Jessica's planned performance spread quickly through their expanding social circle. She invited both Emily and David, of course, but also Claire, Frank, Dr. Klein, and friends from both her Maplewood life and her new school. For the first time, she actively sought to bring together the disparate pieces of her fragmented existence. The night before the talent show, Jessica stood in Claire's guest room, increasingly her room, trying on different outfits, rejecting each one as not quite right. Her gaze fell on the closet shelf where she kept the blue dress, carefully folded in tissue paper. She hadn't looked at it in weeks, this tangible symbol of her complex history. She lifted it down, holding it against herself in front of the mirror. The small dress that had once fit an infant now seemed absurdly tiny compared to her teenage frame, yet something about the color, that specific shade of blue, resonated with her on a level beyond memory. "I think we need to adjust the blue dress," Jessica said, holding it against her body in front of the mirror. It was no longer the baby dress preserved by Emily, nor the kidnapping symbol kept by Margaret, but something she wanted to transform into her own symbol of rebirth for her first public appearance as Lily Foster. Emily's dining room table had been transformed into a sewing workshop, patterns and fabric scattered across its surface like the remnants of a creative explosion. The original blue dress lay at the center, its delicate fabric almost luminous under the overhead light. Jessica sat beside Emily, both of them studying the dress as if it contained secrets they were still trying to decode. "We could use the original fabric for the bodice," Emily suggested, her fingers gently touching the material she had sewn 15 years ago. "Then add complementary fabric for a skirt that would fit you now." Jessica nodded, biting her lower lip in concentration. "I was thinking the same thing. Maybe we could use these blue panels on the sides too." She indicated where additional fabric could extend the original design. They worked together through the afternoon, Emily showing Jessica basic stitches and techniques while they carefully deconstructed and reimagined the tiny dress. The quiet domesticity of the moment wasn't lost on either of them, this collaboration representing something far deeper than mere tailoring. "Margaret taught me to sew a little," Jessica said abruptly, threading a needle with careful precision. "She made costumes for the school play when I was in 4th grade. I was a tree." Emily's hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their work. These sudden revelations of Jessica's life with Margaret no longer triggered the sharp pain they once had. Instead, she found herself genuinely curious. "A tree? Were you a good tree?" Jessica smiled, the memory clearly pleasant. "The best tree. I had these branches that moved when I raised my arms, and Margaret sewed about 100 fabric leaves onto them. I got tangled in the backdrop and nearly took down the entire forest." Emily laughed, picturing a young Jessica struggling with unwieldy branches. "David would have loved that. He was always building elaborate contraptions for your first birthday party. A cardboard castle with working drawbridge. It collapsed when your Uncle Jim sat on it." These exchanges of memories had become more natural over the weeks, Jessica sharing fragments of her childhood, while Emily and David offered glimpses of what might have been, what had been before. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something they could hold together, rather than use to separate themselves from one another. David entered the kitchen as they were pinning the new fabric to the original dress. He paused in the doorway, watching silently, a nostalgic smile tugging at his lips. "I remember when you made that," he said softly to Emily. "You were 8 months pregnant, insisting our daughter needed a special dress for her first spring, even though she wouldn't be born until winter." Emily looked up, caught in the memory. "You thought I was nesting excessively?" "I thought you were wonderful," David corrected, his voice warm with recollection, determined that everything would be perfect for her. Jessica watched this exchange with curious eyes, witnessing the brief connection between her biological parents, a glimpse of what their relationship had been before grief tore them apart. She returned her attention to the dress, concentrating on the physical task to avoid the emotional undertow that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her. Over the next few days, the dress took shape. The original bodice preserved intact, new fabric in a matching shade, extending it into a simple A-line dress appropriate for a teenager. The final result maintained the essence of the baby dress while acknowledging the years that had passed, a perfect metaphor for Jessica Lilly herself. The night of the talent show arrived with all the nervous energy typical of school performances. The auditorium buzzed with conversation as parents, siblings, and friends filed in, programs in hand. Emily and David arrived early, securing seats near the front. Claire, Frank, and Dr. Klein joined them shortly after, forming an unconventional support system, united by their connection to Jessica. "She wouldn't let me hear her rehearse," David confided to Emily as they waited. "Said she wanted it to be a surprise." Emily nodded, scanning the program. "It says here she's performing as Lily Jessica Foster. That's the first time she's used both names publicly." The lights dimmed, and the principal welcomed everyone to the spring talent show. Acts progressed through the typical high school variety. A juggler who dropped more balls than he caught, a surprisingly professional jazz quartet, Zoe's powerful spoken word piece about identity and belonging that seemed particularly pointed given the circumstances. When Jessica's turn came, Emily felt her heart accelerate. The stage remained empty for a moment, then Jessica walked out, carrying David's guitar. The audience's murmurs quieted as she adjusted the microphone and settled onto the stool at center stage. Emily gasped softly. Jessica wore the transformed blue dress, the original fabric visible in the bodice, while new material flowed to just below her knees. The effect was striking, honoring her history while embracing her present form. David reached for Emily's hand instinctively, both of them transfixed by the sight of their daughter on stage. From their seats, Frank and Dr. Klein exchanged approving glances, professional satisfaction momentarily overshadowing their clinical detachment. They had witnessed Jessica's progress from traumatized confusion to this moment of quiet self-assertion. "Good evening," Jessica said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the nerves evident in her posture. "My name is Lily Jessica Foster, and this song is called 2 Lives." Her fingers found the opening chord, and she began to play, a simple melody that grew more confident with each measure. When she started to sing, her voice was clear and unaffected, the lyrics telling a story of separation, discovery, and the struggle to unite disparate pieces of a fractured identity. David gripped Emily's hand tighter, recognizing elements of the musical structure he had taught Jessica during their weekend lessons, now transformed by her own creative instincts. Emily watched through tears, seeing for the first time the innate musicality that Jessica had inherited from David, a talent they'd never had the chance to witness develop. In the audience, Zoe and other friends from both schools watched with newfound understanding, the song offering insight into Jessica's experience that mere explanations could never convey. Even students who had come only for course credit or to support friends fell silent, captivated by the raw emotion in Jessica's performance. When the final chord faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the auditorium erupted in applause. Jessica smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that reached her eyes, and took a small bow before leaving the stage. After the final performance and awards, Jessica received honorable mention. The crowd spilled into the school hallway. Emily and David stood somewhat apart, both unsure of the protocol for this situation. Was Jessica, Lily, their daughter now publicly? Should they approach with parental pride or maintain respectful distance? Jessica resolved their uncertainty by making her way directly to them, still carrying the guitar and glowing with post-performance adrenaline. "What did you think?" she asked, addressing both of them with uncharacteristic eagerness. "You were incredible," David responded, his voice thick with emotion. "The arrangement was beautiful." "The lyrics," Emily added, "they were so honest. And the dress, it looks perfect on you." Jessica smiled, running a hand over the blue fabric. "It feels right, like it was always supposed to become this." Their private moment was interrupted as others approached. Claire with congratulations, Zoe introducing other friends, Frank and Dr. Klein offering their own measured praise. For perhaps the first time, Jessica stood at the center of a circle that included people from every facet of her complex life: biological parents, temporary guardian, professional supporters, and friends from both before and after the revelation that had changed everything. Later that night, in Emily's living room, Jessica carefully hung the blue dress on a hanger. "I'd like to keep it here," she told Emily. "In my room." Emily nodded, understanding the significance of the statement. "Your room is always ready for you." Jessica hesitated, then spoke the words she'd been considering for days. "I think I'm ready to spend more time here. Maybe even move in eventually." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Emily fought to keep her expression neutral, to not overwhelm Jessica with the tidal wave of emotions her words evoked. "Whenever you're ready," she managed. "We can take it as slowly as you need." David, who had been making tea in the kitchen, joined them, sensing the importance of the moment, though he hadn't heard the exchange. "Everything okay?" Jessica nodded. "I was just telling Emily that I might be ready to stay here more often. Not all at once, but moving in that direction." David's face registered the same careful restraint as Emily's, hope tempered by respect for Jessica's autonomy in the process. "That would be wonderful," he said simply. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest they'd shared, discussing how to balance honoring Margaret's memory with building new family bonds, how to integrate Jessica's past into their shared future, practical considerations about school and living arrangements. "I brought something else from Claire's," Jessica said, retrieving a photo album from her overnight bag. "Pictures from growing up with Margaret. I thought maybe they could have a place here, on the shelf with your family photos." Emily took the album gently, opening it to see Jessica's progression from toddler to teenager, birthdays, holidays, school events, all the milestones she and David had missed, captured and preserved by the woman who had stolen those moments from them. "Of course they should be here," Emily said, her voice steady despite the complexity of emotions the photographs evoked. "They're part of your story. All of it belongs here." That night, alone in the bedroom that oscillated between being Lily's and Jessica's, she held the transformed blue dress against the moonlight streaming through the window, realizing that her 16th birthday was exactly 1 week away. The first she would celebrate with her original family, a date that would require a definitive decision about who she really wanted to be from now on. The morning of her 16th birthday dawned clear and crisp, sunlight streaming through the curtains of what was now officially Lily's room. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the space that had evolved over recent weeks, no longer a preserved shrine to babyhood nor a temporary guest room, but a genuine reflection of her emerging identity. Photographs from both her lives shared shelf space. Textbooks from her new school sat alongside keepsakes from Maplewood. She heard soft movements downstairs, Emily, no doubt already awake and preparing something special. The thought brought a smile to her lips rather than the anxiety such expectations had triggered just months ago. A gentle knock preceded Emily's entrance, carrying a small cake with a single lit candle. The tradition was unfamiliar to Lily. Birthday breakfasts in Margaret's household had involved pancakes shaped like numbers, not candlelit cakes at dawn. "Happy birthday," Emily said softly. "This was something my mother always did for me, a morning wish before the day begins." Lily sat up, touched by this glimpse into family traditions she'd never known. "Thank you. Make a wish," Emily prompted, holding the cake steady. Lily closed her eyes briefly before blowing out the flame, not sharing the silent hope that had formed in her heart. The day unfolded with a measured joy, the excitement tempered by awareness of all the birthdays they hadn't shared. Emily had clearly restrained her natural instinct to compensate for 15 missed celebrations with excessive gifts and decorations. Instead, the house was decorated tastefully, with enough festivity to mark the occasion without overwhelming Lily with expectations. By mid-morning, Lily's phone buzzed with messages from friends and acquaintances from both worlds, former classmates from Maplewood and new friends from Lincoln High, all sending birthday wishes. Maya sent a particularly touching message, reminiscing about their shared birthdays in elementary school and expressing hope they'd remain connected despite everything. A call from Claire confirmed she would arrive for dinner, bringing Lily's belongings from the guest room, a tacit acknowledgement of Lily's decision to make Emily's house her primary residence. The transition had been gradual over the past week, with more clothes and personal items migrating to the foster home after each weekend visit. "You're sure about this?" Claire had asked when Lily first broached the subject. "There's no rush, you know." "I'm sure," Lily had replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "It feels right. Not perfect, not completely comfortable yet, but right." The doorbell rang shortly after noon, revealing David laden with wrapped packages and a bouquet of lilies and roses. A nod to her full name that didn't go unnoticed. "Not too much, I hope," he said, setting the gifts on the coffee table. I tried to show restraint. Emily emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands onto an apron. "Unlike someone who's been baking since dawn," she said with a self-deprecating smile. "Mom always made my favorites too," Lily said, the word mom falling naturally from her lips in reference to Margaret. She no longer flinched at using the term, and Emily no longer stiffened at hearing it. They had reached an unspoken understanding that Margaret would always be Mom in Lily's memories, while Emily and David were forming relationships with her under their own names, not replacing what was lost, but creating something new alongside it. David set to work in the living room, arranging photographs in chronological order across the coffee table. He had spent weeks gathering images, baby photos they had preserved, school pictures recovered from Margaret's apartment, recent snapshots of Lily with Emily, with David, with Claire, even with Frank and Dr. Klein. The result was a visual timeline that spanned her entire life, bridging the 15-year chasm that had once seemed unbridgeable. "This is amazing," Lily said, kneeling beside the display. "It's like seeing my life from outside all at once." "You had two separate visual histories," David explained. "I thought your 16th birthday was a good moment to bring them together." The afternoon brought more arrivals. Claire with a cake from Lily's favorite bakery near the school, Frank with documents confirming that all legal issues were finally resolved, and Dr. Klein bearing a journal bound in soft leather. "For recording your thoughts going forward," the psychologist explained. "Your story is unique, but it's still being written." Zoe arrived with a hand-painted card and a friendship bracelet woven in blue and silver threads. "For your two lives," she explained with characteristic directness, "coming together in one pattern." As the gathering expanded to include this unconventional family circle, Lily retreated, briefly to her room, overwhelmed not by grief or confusion, but by the strange blessing of having so many people invested in her well-being. She stood before the mirror, contemplating her reflection and the decisions that still lay ahead. The blue dress hung on the closet door where she had left it after the talent show. With deliberate care, she slipped it on, smoothing the fabric over her hips. The transformation of the dress paralleled her own, the original elements preserved while new aspects had been added, creating something that honored the past while embracing the present. When she descended the stairs wearing the dress, conversation halted. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You look beautiful," David said, breaking the silence. Lily smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. It seemed appropriate. Today isn't just any birthday, it's a kind of rebirth, too. The celebration continued with dinner, cake, and gifts opened under the watchful eyes of this assembled not-quite family, who had become, against all odds, a community of support. The presents themselves reflected thoughtful consideration of Lily's dual identity. Books that reflected her established interests, alongside new experiences her biological parents hoped to share with her. After the guests departed, with Claire hugging Lily tightly and whispering that her room would always be available if needed, the core trio remained. Emily, David, and Lily, united by biology and now, increasingly, by choice. "There's one more thing we'd like to do today," Emily said, checking her watch. "If you're willing." The cemetery was quiet in the early evening, golden light slanting across the headstones. Margaret's grave now had a proper marker, a simple granite stone with her name and dates. Without discussion, they had brought flowers, lilies, which Lily placed gently at the base of the stone. "I wanted to thank her," Emily explained, her voice steady despite the emotional complexity of the moment. "Despite everything, she loved you. She raised you to be compassionate, intelligent, resilient. I'll always wish those years had been mine, but I can acknowledge that she gave you what I would have wanted for you, love and security." David nodded in agreement. And in the end, she was preparing to do the right thing. Too late, but still, she recognized the truth in her final months. Lily knelt before the grave, her blue dress pooling around her on the grass. This wasn't her first visit. She had come alone several times since learning the truth, but it was different sharing this moment with Emily and David, the three of them acknowledging the complicated reality of their intertwined lives. "I miss her," Lily said simply, "and I'm angry at her. Both things are true." She placed a single flower on the headstone, whispering, "Thank you for loving me, even if it was in the wrong way." Back at the house, preparations for the formal birthday celebration were complete. The dining room table held the official cake, 16 candles glowing warmly in the dimmed light. Friends and extended family would arrive soon, but this moment belonged to just the three of them. "Make a wish," David said, echoing Emily's words from that morning. Lily stood before the cake, the blue dress shimmering in the candlelight. The assembled guests began singing "Happy Birthday," their voices blending in the time-honored tradition that transcended the unusual circumstances of their gathering. As the song concluded, Lily paused, looking at the expectant faces surrounding her, biological relatives meeting her for the first time, friends from her life as Jessica, new friends who knew her only as Lily, professionals who had guided her through the transition between identities. All united in celebrating not just her birth 16 years ago, but her rediscovery, her resilience, her ongoing journey to integrate her fractured past into a cohesive sense of self. With a deep breath, she leaned forward and blew out all 16 candles in a single exhalation. "What did you wish for?" David asked with a smile. Lily returned his smile, looking from him to Emily, then around the circle of faces, her extended, unconventional family. "That someday," she said, her voice clear and confident, "I could call this place home again, even if it's just on the weekends." The room erupted in laughter and applause, breaking the emotional tension. As Lily accepted the knife to cut the first piece of cake, Emily watched her daughter, truly her daughter now, by choice as well as biology, and felt for the first time the possibility of a future not dominated by the past. For 15 years, Emily had preserved Lily's room like a museum exhibit, frozen in time on the day of her disappearance. Now, watching Lily serve cake to relatives she was just getting to know, Emily realized that the preservation of the past had given way to something far more precious: the living, breathing, evolving relationship with the daughter who had returned, not as the baby she had lost, but as a unique person who needed to be known and loved on her own terms, exactly like the blue dress, transformed but still carrying the threads of its original story. When Lily blew out the candles, everyone asked what she had wished for, but she just smiled, keeping the secret to herself. That someday the pain of having lived two separate lives would transform into the strength of living one complete life, woven with threads from both experiences, just like the blue dress that now symbolized not what had been lost, but what had finally been found.